All right. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's interview. This week, I'm joined by a pretty awesome guest. He is Brock Beard. He is founder of, the Brock Beard channel on YouTube, as well as lastcar.info, a website dedicated to telling the stories of the races that are happening on the backside of the field. Brock, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, doing great. Thank you for having me on.
So, yeah, I think as I was telling Brock before the interview, when I started doing research for the interview, I was amazed by how many of his videos I had watched beforehand. And I feel like even a lot of people watching this are probably going to be like, that name sounds familiar. And then check out your YouTube channel and realize, oh, crap, I watched his video on Gin Racing or, on whatever. So it's really awesome to get to talk with you this evening, Brock.
Definitely. Thank you for your support of the videos. As we talked about earlier, I've been kind of trying to rebuild the channel and everything, kind of rebrand it a bit. And I'm glad that viewers like yourself are checking it out.
So to begin, Brock, when did you first become a fan of NASCAR?
So good question. Back in 1991 was as far back as I go. My earliest memory is July of 91 and watching Rick Mast flip the Skulls wheel upside down at Talladega. And I remember, I think that was one of the first diecasts I found was the Skull Oldsmobile. Back then, of course, they didn't have the tobacco sponsor on it, so it said Magic Markets on it. But I remember specifically seeking that one out because I remembered that crash. So right from the beginning, the spectacle of the sport really drew me in that way, and it really started at that point. Went to my first race in person, Sears Point Raceway in 1992, and and saw Days of Thunder in between all that. It was in theaters a bit later than the 1990 release where I was in West Coast here, and that's really all those things kind of happened in a row, and made me a fan for life.
So back then, when you started having that boom in the '90s, and you had your Gordons or whatever, when did NASCAR, I guess, start reaching that popularity where out in California it went from just those guys from Carolinas out here racing to crap, I want to go to the race, or I guess it was cool, or maybe to be a fan or whatever.
In many ways. How long have you followed the sport? You don't mind me asking.
So I was born in '92. I think 2001 is when I really was like, I want to follow what's going on and all of that.
Yeah, because you came in right in a big boom time in the sport there. Because certainly you hear this from other drivers, and it was very true for the fans alike. I remember, certainly in the early 90s, it wasn't that big of a sport. I remember the 92 Hooters 500. I missed the end of that famous race there because I was doing something else at the time there, and it came back and, tennis was on as if nothing had happened. So even the networks didn't treat it with that much, a celebration. But, certainly by like 94, 95, you get the first Brickyard 400, you get the new Monte Carlo, you have the rise of Jeff Gordon. And then you get up into like 98, 99, you get Dale Earnhardt's in basketball, and Dale, and he's in King of the Hill and all this. That was really the big part. We had Britney Spears showing up for the Daytona. That was big. That was really the time where, the sport had really arrived. But even then, on the West Coast, I remember, everybody was really more into football or baseball or basketball. They didn't really, I was kind of the weird one out. I've been the weird one out in pretty much every social group I've been in as, that one NASCAR fan. And that's been true through both the rise and fall of it. And I've tried to get my friends, whether they were classmates in law school or teammates on the rowing team or friends in high school, into the sport with very little success. Even working the night shift to the hospital, get my coworker into it. It's always been challenging there, but yeah, I would say that was the time. It's certainly 98 through, I would say maybe about 2001, 2002. I know some people think it's more 06, 07. I think the real peak was those last years of the Winston Cup Series. Those were very different times.
Yeah. So next up, a lot of fans focus on the front runners. What brought your attention to the battles and stories coming from the back half of the field?
Well, you mentioned, watching, races on the West Coast. I think that was a really big part of it. When I grew up, Sears Point was the only NASCAR race I ever went to
Hmm.
from 1992 through 2007. So, and the first race I went to after that in '07 was Bristol. So,
Hmm.
complete culture change from seeing it out here, which was just mind blowing at the time.
Yeah.
So growing up, if you watch some of those old Sears Point races, one thing that's very interesting about it is you hear about the road course ringers, and you have unusual drivers driving cars. Tommy Kendall and Kyle Petty's car, Boris
Hmm.
Said, Ron Fellows, and you also had weird teams that were out there. That teams that, for me, it seemed like these were teams that I saw every year, so I was kind of used to following. It was like, oh, here's the Midgley Racing team, the 09 car that R.K.
Yeah.
Smith would run, or these other ones. And it would surprise me watching it on a more frequent basis that these teams only ran on the West Coast, or they only ran at Sears Point. And so, I think that was probably the start of it there. I was always interested in those kind of weird teams
Hmm.
and trying to see how that changed. And also, I remember Bob Jenkins. Bob Jenkins had a huge effect on me on his ESPN broadcast, because I always liked the way that he would go through the rundown. And when he did the lineup in the background, it would just kind of scroll through 5 spots at a time. He would say, look out where look through this. You can see this lineup and see where your favorite driver is running. And I always
Yeah.
liked that he said that, because it reminded me that even if the last place guy that's 30 laps down, they have a fan out there that's waiting to see where they are. Maybe they're
Yeah.
catching somebody else. And I think that was that happened at a very impressionable age in my life. And I still remember that, really.
That's cool. I was talking to one of the guys that follows my channel the other day, and we were talking about how, now you got social media and all, but
Mhm.
back, so like I said, I got into the sport in 2001, so that's when Speed Channel got really big.
Yep.
And so every Friday I'd go from school, I would tune in to just practice and qualifying so I could learn what was going on. Then Monday I would tune in and you'd have, Inside NASCAR or Sprint Cup or whatever. And then you would have NBS 24/7. I don't know if you remember that show. And
Mhm.
it was through that I started following all these teams. And I was like, oh, like all these people are working so hard and they finished in like 20th and they're all super
Yep.
excited. And I'm a lifelong Waltrip fan, and his whole career, it seemed like it was
Mm.
either just, being these high or just, struggling to qualify. And that's when I started. I remember in '07, it got to the point where he would qualify for the race. And I would just be like, I don't care what happens in the race. He qualified. And
Yep. Yep.
it was just cool because even with your videos, that's one thing I enjoy, is that you're telling the story of those people.
No, I appreciate that. And, you mentioned 2001. I mean, man, you came in at a really good time, because
Mm,
I remember, I mean, I had experience watching races, between I was 18 years old in 2000, 2001, that whole era there.
mhm,
And so growing up, I remember seeing the ESPN side of it. You had RPM Tonight, um, uh, you had the ESPN group, you had TNN, you had
mhm,
TBS, you had all these different ones that had very different styles. CBS, Ken Squire. The TV contract in 2001 was absolutely earth-shattering. The
mhm.
coverage was so much bigger. And you mentioned these other shows and everything that during that time, Speed Channel and everything like that. I think that was if there was ever a time to be brought into the sport. It's awful what happened with, of course, that it was
Mhm.
it was all under the cloud of Dale Earnhardt's death. But at the same time, there was so much effort to really encourage, a full understanding of all these different teams, and
Mhm.
and in that, and I remember the Speed Weeks 2001 leading into Daytona. There was this sense that there was something just
Yeah.
big coming up, and shoot, I don't have to tell you as a Michael Waltrip fan, certainly in that sense. I mean, I remember for me, Michael Waltrip growing up, he was the hard luck hero. I love the Bahari racing car he ran. I
Yeah.
love that old Pennzoil car where they did the throwback when we were at Darlington. I
Mhm.
couldn't wait to get there. And I remember when Mike Joy said, like, look, Dale Jr. dreams of winning the Daytona 500. Michael Waltrip just dreams of winning this
Mhm.
race, any race. And that was it. I mean, he had a lot of times, even all the way through 2000, that he was close to winning a race.
Mhm.
And it was and that was the kind of drama that kept you engaged. I always call racing my soap opera, because I got to know what happens each week to these guys. And I
Mhm.
still feel that way to a degree. But and Michael was one of those great stories,
Mhm.
and obviously much has been written and said about that moment, but yeah, that was huge in more ways than even what's publicly known, really.
Mhm. So my favorite part of your channel are your commentary videos and your Last Car film series. Is there a video that stands out to you as your favorite on your channel?
That's a tough question because I think if I mean I'm probably the most excited about this next series that I'm working on. If you don't mind the plug,
Oh no.
Rise of the Field Fillers is
Hmm.
the series I'm working on. That's focusing on the 2004 Nextel Cup season from the perspective of the small teams that had to fill the field, and
Hmm.
I think that's gonna be a very exciting series. The first, I just finished recording the script of the first episode actually just before the show tonight.
Oh, wow.
But of the ones that I've produced, certainly the one that stands out is Three Before February,
Hmm.
because I didn't plan on it quite being that long. When I first posted it in November, I just treated it as a long YouTube video, but I
Yeah.
I wanted to repolish it, and because it really played more as a documentary, so I polished it and re-released it this year. That was something I think that was a really critical story that just doesn't get talked about these
Hmm.
days. And because for me, again, I was in high school during all that. Um, I remember that feeling that year when you had these deaths of Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin Jr. and Tony Roper, and just wondering like what is going on. I thought the sport was like
Yeah.
safe. It's been years since you had any fatalities in any of the divisions. What's going on here, and why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? And there's really not that much talk about it because, of course, as I say in the video, I mean, Earnhardt's thing, and no disrespect to Earnhardt at all or the
Yeah.
loss. I mean, it was massive. It completely changed the direction of the sport and everything too. But it wasn't just him that caused that emotion. This thing that happened the year before, Dale Earnhardt walking out to his car in the 2001 Daytona 500. One of the things he did on the way was hug Kyle Petty because he knew what it meant when Kyle was driving Adam's car, what should have been his car as his rookie season. So even to him, what happened in the 2000 season touched him. For as much as people say that he didn't care about the Hans device or anything like that. So I thought it was very important to take a real comprehensive look at the sequence of events that year, and
Yeah.
really even after I made it the first time, I there were a couple of mistakes I made it, or a couple of things that weren't expressed very well. I really wanted to get like another run at it because that's why it was re-released, because I think that's a really important story, and maybe and something that again, I mean, a lot of fans these days. I mean, it's we're talking things that happened 20 years ago now. You have a
Yeah.
whole other generation grow up there that just have no idea about that, or just hear very little bits of it. I think it was important to get that story out there. So I'm glad that it's received as much attention that it has. It's the second most popular video on my channel right now, and I'm very pleased that it's had the response that it's had.
Yeah, like you said, I think a lot of people when they go back, they're like, okay, Earnhardt died and this happened. But I remember back then, because I had followed the sport growing up. My family was just obsessed, so it was all Earnhardt, and I was the black sheep that loved Gordon's rainbow car. So
Yep, yep.
I remember just like hearing and being like, oh, that guy died, and it was just so weird thinking, oh, that's guy died. And then in 2001 and on from that, I would look back and see that they announced, oh, we're going to do this safety change. And I look back on it and think
Mhm.
it's crazy the stuff that even just 20 years ago was completely legal, or people thinking, oh, it's not,
Yep.
why are you going to change that? And the sport nowadays, you'll have the most vicious wreck and you'll think, okay, that guy's okay, and
Mhm.
yeah, I look at someone like Newman's wreck and I'm like, that's the
Yep.
wreck, and I forget how long, and people are like, that's bad looking because you're just so used to whatever happens. And I remember watching the three before February and just thinking like this takes me back, and there's such a good look at, Earnhardt passed away, but here are these other people who all had these careers all in front of them. And I know one thing I get like obsessed with is whenever people do like the what if series and all. And I think that,
Mhm.
it's just crazy to look back and see all that happen. I don't.
Yeah. No, and see, that's the thing, and that's when, again, something that was, certainly very challenging at that time and very controversial. And again, I
Hmm.
think the thing with NASCAR in general, and I've seen this from other, you know, times I've looked at this in the sport, they seem very eager in a lot of cases, and even to a degree, even with Earnhardt's, to kind of forget or just kind of brush aside some of the,
Hmm.
more unpleasant angles of a lot of these things. And I'm sure we'll talk about the JD McDuffie thing too, because that was a
Yeah.
big part of that too. But that's, I think those are important lessons to learn from, and unfortunately, we're not really hearing it from NASCAR themselves. And these are things that come up that way. But yeah, I mean, and you mentioned the Ryan Newman accident. I mean, that's about as close as to what that felt like at 2001, the Daytona
Yeah.
500. Certainly. And then during the 2000 season, the things with Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin, they didn't have live coverage of practice for most
Hmm.
races. I don't believe, and I mean, Antonio Roper's happened in the truck race, but for the practice accidents, it was just like, oh, this happened like 2 hours ago. You didn't
Yeah.
have social media, and you're like, what the heck was that?
Yeah.
And for me, for Kenny Irwin, long before I had any thoughts of like doing anything like in broadcasting or covering races
Hmm.
or doing any of that beat stuff, Kenny Irwin was the first driver I ever wanted to interview. And he
Hmm.
wasn't my favorite driver necessarily, but I remember a lot of the coverage I did see in the late 90s. He always just looked troubled and kind of conflicted, and which is strange because you see in a lot of those interviews too, and he's also very happy and joyful, and
Yeah.
laughing as hard as Kenny Wallace at one point, which is quite the accomplishment.
Hmm.
But I think that was, so when he passed, I mean, that was really, I think that one in particular. I mean, no disrespect to the other two either, but
Yeah.
to Adam or to Tony, but Kenny's in particular hit me pretty hard. I mean, that one ranks right up there with Davey Allison in '93. That
Hmm.
was really bad. And then of course Earnhardt. So there's been there's a lot of moments that maybe aren't as positive necessarily in the sport, but they're important moments to remember,
Yeah.
and things going forward.
Speaking of like tragedy and remembering people, you wrote a biography about the life of J.D. McDuffie. What was it about his career that made you decide that just doing a simple video was not fitting enough for him, and that you needed to actually take the time, research, and write a book? Because I mean, for anyone who's never tried to write even a short story, it's pretty difficult to fill 5 to 10 pages, let alone I think it was 300 and something pages of your book. What about his career just made you think I have to write a book on him?
It's JD McDuffie is it'll sound perhaps a little overdramatic to say this, but I think he almost kind of haunts. He was haunted kind of my NASCAR
Hmm.
fandom really through it. I didn't see his accident live in 1991, in August of '91, but he's a figure that has popped up time and time again in over the years, and as much as I've talked about him, and it always comes up incidentally. Like my first the first time I had ever heard of JD was in 2000, when 9 whole years after his accident, and I found a diecast of his at a antique store, and I never heard of the guy before, and he had a really interesting paint scheme, so I started doing some research on it. Very little information back then,
Yeah.
but found out that he died in a wreck at Watkins Glen. I'm like, well, Watkins Glen, I've watched races there for 8 years. I never heard of anything about this, and really the research began at that moment. And really at that time, I was collecting information just out of curiosity. And so really the project, it wasn't until 2016 that I really decided to actually make this into a book. So by then, a lot of the work it was really a matter more of transcribing what I knew and trying to fill the gaps as best as possible with the interviews. And what
Hmm.
was interesting, so that was really kind of the starting point from that. But it wasn't until I started interviewing people. The first person I interviewed was Marty Burke in 2011, uh, and because I had heard something about him being involved with the team and the Classic Trophies company and things like that, and I wasn't sure exactly what his role was with the team.
Hmm.
And then I happened to just find his name on a website, random search. And I was like, is this the same guy? I don't even know. It's like, and I contacted him. I asked him a question about it, and he answered just very, I think it was something about like It's like, he's like, yeah, did you work with JD McDuffie's team? And he said, he's like, yes, right up until August of '91 when he died. And I'm like, oh my God, this is real. And so, and we're still, good friends. We've talked a lot since then, but he referred me to this guy. He referred me to Mike Demers, who unfortunately just passed away recently, who's the crew chief. Mike referred me to Jerry Glenn, who's the engine builder there. His son was working with him. And eventually we got even all the way to like Linda McDuffie and her JD's daughter and Linda's mother, Imogene, who I never thought would talk about it. Jimmy Means talked to me right after Dale Jr.'s wedding, one day there. And I didn't even have to ask him about it. He offered what he saw in the accident in 1991. I didn't even have to ask him. That was the first thing he told me. And it just had momentum of its own. And at this time, in 2016, I wasn't really making any videos for the channel really at that point. The site was pretty much, my YouTube channel was pretty much dormant for about 4 or 5 years. But I was building up the Last Car site, and I was thinking of doing articles. I did one on Marty in 2011, but clearly by this point, I had so many other stories to put together. But what really started it off, I would say, is in 2016, I read the book called Killer Show. It's a fantastic but harrowing account of the Station nightclub fire that occurred in 2003. Disaster, 100 people were killed in a fire at a crowded nightclub. I think it was in New Jersey. But the writing in it is so good. It's written so well that you literally feel that you are there. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, is there something that I know about or I'm curious about that I could write with that level of authority? And again, that's when kind of the specter of JD kind of came in. It's like, okay, yeah, it's got to be this. It's got to be JD. And really, the book was already coming together. I mean, the family didn't know about it at the time that I was starting it. Front Row Motorsports didn't know about it when they were doing the JD tribute scheme in Darlington. Nobody knew. And luckily, we got a hold of a small publisher in Texas, Waldorf Publishing. Were very good to take us on, and the rest came together from there. And I'm unbelievably thankful for being in it, and really blessed, quite honestly, to have have some small role in all this, because I just finished talking to Charlie Birch just the other day, the team photographer, and he still shares JD stories with me and everything. I mean, unbelievable friendships that have come up from this. And there's probably going to be a second edition of the JD book at some point, because there's so much more I've even heard of since even the release in 2018. So that's kind of a long answer, but I could go on about JD for days on that, because again, he has been a figure. Even at the Last Car site, when I found out he had the most last place finishes, that was like, I wasn't looking to write about him, but there it was right there, and that really altered the trajectory of how I was going to write for the website too. So again, he's been a big role in a lot of my work.
Yeah, I know growing up, there was people that I would look at and I'd be like, man, why is that guy on the track? Or man, that guy's always finishing last. And I know with JD, that was kind of the idea I had, because it's, like you said, I feel like a lot of times, I think sometimes it might be done out of respect for the family or whatever. But out of everything that I've ever seen, I didn't remember ever hearing anything about him. And then I started researching, and I was just like, man, this guy, he's got the story that he's telling and all. It's just like Michael Waltrip. It wasn't that he didn't know how to drive a car, Exactly. And that was when I came across your book, I was like, man, so it's on my reading list. But so when you approached it, was there any like hesitation of, oh man, I don't know about talking, or did you feel like the family and his crew were like, man, we've waited for someone to come along? I guess when you announced that you were wanting to turn it into a book, was there any hesitation, or was it, no, we want to do this to?
No. I mean, for me, especially for where I was in my particular career and where I was professionally, writing has always been a big passion of mine. I was talking about, before the show about, different journeys I've taken. I studied English in college. I did a thesis on disaster films of the 1970s. That was before the JD project was the longest thing I'd written. And I wrote a lot of short stories after college. So I was certainly anxious to get something published. I thought I was going to go more into fiction, But the more I started reading, I really felt that my stronger suit was in nonfiction. And but yeah, to answer your question, no, there was no hesitation. I felt that it was better to ask forgiveness than permission in this case. I think that JD's story was, it was in the back of my mind. I probably should have started writing the book probably at least a good 2 or 3 years earlier. I think I was meaning to, but I was a little unfocused in how to go about it. And I think it really was reading Killer Show that really pushed me in that direction. But no, I think, and I'm glad. I think if I had tried to get the permission of everybody involved and all that, I think I would have either probably wouldn't have come together as quickly, or maybe there would have been too much micromanaging. Yeah. I was very fortunate to be able to just focus on it. There were even portions of it I wrote on my lunch breaks on the night shift, working at a hospital emergency room. I did my interview with Jerry Glenn on one lunch break there, which was at 4 a.m. Pacific. So it became really a single-minded focus on just getting this thing out. It felt like, man, even if this is the only book I ever write, and I certainly don't plan for it to be the only one. Boy, I really want to get this thing out there.
Yeah.
So that was really the push, and it was certainly a passion project, and I'm still very, very pleased with how it came together, because it was like you said earlier, it's definitely a challenge to write a book. It's the longest thing I've written. Even the next book I'm working on, which I haven't announced yet, I don't think it's gonna be quite as long as that. So it's well worth the journey though. Absolutely.
Finally, being someone who has just poured through so much data, is there a random stat that stands out to you as just the most fascinating thing, or even comical, that when you read it, or even to this day, you're like, I can't believe this guy did this, or this guy never did that, or whatever? Is there anything that stands out to you?
It's a good question. I mean, the great thing with lastcard.info is it's always a great when you say that, I write about the last place finishers in NASCAR races, it's not hard to explain. And it begs the question, why? So it's much better. It's been, and as much as I do, kind of the heavier stuff like on JD and 3 Before February, I know that there's certainly a segment of my readership and stuff that really kind of looks more at what I do on there as more of a comical side of it. And I do think that I have, at my core, kind of a wry sense of humor that comes across even when I don't intend it to. And unfortunately you get situations like, this past weekend with Timmy Hill, and I'm not against Timmy Hill by any means, but when he finished last in 2 different divisions on the same day with the same car number, I got to write about it. And if now at the same time, I don't play favorites. If Chase Elliott finishes last the next 5 straight weeks and breaks, that all-time record, I'm going to write about it all 5 of those weeks. So it's equal opportunity. But, to answer your question, really interesting statistics, or even humorous ones, this past week was really interesting because we've seen the issue of rear hubs be an interesting, the reasons out is always a big thing that I like to categorize in the statistics. And the rear hub issue is fascinating to me because looking through the stats, there had been at least one example of let me make sure to get this right, a left front hub, a right front hub, or a right rear hub being the reason that a driver had fallen out of the race. But not one instance of a left rear hub being the reason that somebody had finished last in a race. Now, Talladega this year, Matt Kenseth fell out, and NASCAR said that it was a rear hub. They didn't distinguish one side or the other. So I contacted Chip Ganassi Racing. I said, look, I have to find out. Was it the left side or was it the right side? And best the PR guy was very helpful. He said that, well, the crew was working on the left side of the car. So, okay, first left rear hub. Probably was. It doesn't show the results. Same thing listening to Timmy Hill's thing the other night there. I mean, they had a problem on the left side of the car. NASCAR still called it a rear hub issue. So, but, I mean, that's funny to me. I mean, I don't know. But, objectively funny, you get reasons out where there's one that literally says no reason. Or somebody falls out because of mud, or somebody falls out because of, or quit is always great. Quit hasn't been used since 1993. You have start and park teams now, they'll use other reasons. But you see quit now, and, people, it cracks you up. It's just like, I'm just sick of driving. I'm getting out of the car. And it's quit. That's just what it is. That probably gets the most reactions there.
Yeah, that I
But
was
yeah.
I was gonna say I had so much fun the other day. I don't think I'd ever found that page until the other night, and it took me back. This must have been like 2000, 2001. That's back when you had to like buy the books on people, so I couldn't just go to
Yep.
jski.com or whatever. And so I had the book, and it was on Jeff Gordon's career, and on the back it had his running order, and if he was out, the reason why. And I remember being like, his fuel pump messed up? What? And
Yep.
it would just intrigue me seeing like, oh, he fell out because of this. And so when I found your that page on your site, I was like, that's crazy because we forget that. And another thing that stood out was um looking at some of the years, you would have your starting Parker, what a guy, guy right there. But seeing some years where it was Kyle Busch finishing with the second most last place
Hmm.
or your third or whatever. And it was crazy to think that we think of, oh, well, if it's last place, it's always going to be, this guy from this team. But
Yep.
it's funny to see how many years you have a big name, come close to that record or whatever, or winning that championship as you call it on your site.
Exactly. And you raise a perfect point. I mean, I mentioned Chase Elliott earlier. I mean, after he crashed out at Phoenix in the penultimate race where we were covering the action that weekend, he went from being potentially in the championship four to one of, I think, four different people that were tied for the last car championship. So that was our big push going into Homestead last year. And and it's the championship thing. I mean, that's always fun. We've had that keeps it. It started as a necessity because if you have a driver that finishes last multiple times, you run out of things to say about it. I think it's
Mhm.
important, so we have something there to kind of rank it. But it does become instructive because you can, I was actually asked this in a Ask Me Anything over at Reddit when the JD book came out,
Mhm.
and they asked me like, is it still relevant to even do last car anymore because anybody can finish last? And I say, well, heck, that's more of a reason to do it.
Yeah.
Now you could have like, yeah, it could be. Look what happened with Ryan Priest this year. He was,
Mhm.
just no fault of his own, but he was in a situation where suddenly, he's a driver trying to get his first win and rookie candidate, and now this year he has this thing where he gets like what, three in a row, potentially
Yeah.
four in a row, and then his teammate does. I mean, that's that. I mean, he got to the point NBC was talking about it.
Yeah.
So other people get to notice it too, and I'd be very surprised if Rick Allen did not have the website and his open browser there at the studio because it should have been.
Yeah, and going back, like you said, you have your humor and you poke fun,
Yeah.
but I know too, as a huge fan like yourself of small teams,
Hmm.
one thing I appreciate is that you tell the story in a way that there's a story going on, and I know
Yep.
I've spoken with people, and like before or after the interview, they talk about how one thing they appreciate is that on my channel, there's not these videos out there where I'm like, let me tell you why this guy sucks or whatever. Because I know even your
Hmm.
video about Jerry Nadeau, there's people that, I remember that would sit there and say, oh, like that guy's the loser on, Hendrick or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, I don't think this guy's a loser. I don't. I remember when his career was cut short, thinking, crap, like I think this guy had a lot of potential, and I think
Hmm.
that's one thing you do well as that you're not sitting there saying like this guy sucks because he's last place. It's more of,
Yeah.
hey, there's a story behind why this guy finished last. Let's find it. So
Exactly. And I appreciate that comes across because I think that's the biggest challenge. As much as it's a nice icebreaker to people like maybe outside the sport
mhm.
or people that are other fans, I certainly wouldn't blame teams or anything or drivers for being upset at being right, all this. Now I think at the same time, I think a driver would be more upset finishing second than finishing last,
Mhm.
regardless of what. I think that's where you really see the emotions, especially in
Yeah.
these playoffs and stuff, where winning is even more important than usual. But I've had I won't name names, but people who follow the site know people who team members have gotten in my face or blocked me on Twitter or just literally asked me, do you hate us or why do you hate us? And
Oh
I'm like, look,
wow.
I don't like, and I feel like I'm, and I have to really ask myself at the same time. You mentioned the approach to the articles. I'll tell you this. I mean, there was a critical moment in that because if you look at my older articles, there isn't much there. or in those. I basically just say, the guy started in the spot, he fell up because of this. Here's the statistics that put it in context of NASCAR history, and I think it lent itself much more to being like satire or something. The turning point to me was in 2013 when Jason Leffler died in a sprint car accident. Just, I think, 3 days after he finished last in a start and park ride at Pocono.
Yeah.
And I did an article where I pointed out that I was pretty much the only person that wrote about him that weekend. And, while that was true, even the article that I did on him was very short. It didn't really, it went a little bit more into how his season had gone and his history at Pocono and things like that. But, you still didn't hear the same stories about he flew on a helicopter with Tony Stewart after the race and things like that. The little stories that, are significant, and that certainly became even more significant after his death. And that really, JD was a big part of already kind of going away from kind of more leaning into the satire side of it. But Leffler's accident in particular was what kind of encouraged me to kind of look more into, a longer narrative, and something where even if the driver falls out in the first lap, there's going to be a pretty long article about it with more context in there. So I always try to dig for more information. Typically, I love to be at the track, obviously with the extenuating circumstances of this year. That has been unfortunately more difficult. I'm certainly hoping that things loosen up enough that at least media can get in the infield, because for me personally, I can only afford to maybe do 2 or 3 races a year, and there's not really much use in me going to a track if I can't get in the infield for at least part of it, because that's where I get a lot of the really interesting stories and tend to kind of spread them out. But that's definitely another phase of what I do with the NASCAR site that's been interesting and has also got me in a few scuffles before too. But I enjoy it. I love following these guys. I wouldn't, I have no problem walking right past the Jimmy Johnsons and the Kyle Bushes and stuff and going, when I get to a track, I want to go right to the end of the line and I want to see who's there. I want to see if it's Biker Racing. I want to see if it's BK Racing or, and see those guys swap cars and stuff. It's great. I mean, I love that, and those guys, both by and large, they're very friendly. They give you a lot of access. They tell you a lot more that the big teams just don't show you. I remember when Chase Elliott fell out at Phoenix, there were armed guards standing behind the car to make sure nobody got a clear look at anything they shouldn't be looking at that car. So I was very lucky to get some pictures. They towed the car to the wrong garage area, so I got some pretty good shots of the car getting towed back. But if I tried to do that in the garage area, I probably would have left there in handcuffs. But with these small teams, they give you some great access, and I'm very thankful for what they do, and I hope they keep doing it.
Yeah, well, Brock, usually at this point, I allow people to plug whatever they want to plug. So the floor is yours to plug whatever you'd like.
No, thank you so much. Well, I mean, the big thing is lastcar.info is the website, as you mentioned there. You just type that in the domain name, and that'll bring it right up. That's my articles I do on Cup, Xfinity, and Truck each week, as well as my ARCA correspondent, William Saki, that covers those other races. I think he had just one that was just posted today. Also, the YouTube channel, Brock Beard, just put my name in, it'll pop right up that way. My Patreon, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. We have multiple tiers for bonus content. Working on kind of retooling that a little bit here to kind of get everybody a more bang for their buck, including advanced access to both my videos, and I didn't mention this earlier, also the videos that I narrate for NASCAR Man History. Very thankful to be able to have the opportunity to work with him on that, because believe me, I get contacted a lot about his videos, and I just always turn the camera his direction because he does all the work. I'm just the one lucky enough to be able to read the words there, and it makes me want to work that much harder for my videos. So big thanks to him as well. And on my Twitter, @LastCarOnBrock, which is the same way Mike Joy addressed me when I ran into him at Sears Point. He says, "Oh, LastCarOnBrock." So very easy to find all that stuff there. You just Google my name, all that pulls up. Yeah, hope to. NASCAR Nation is a small one, but we are growing every day.
All right. Thank you very much, Brock.
Thank you.